Here are some more weird phobias. I bet you didn't know that there's a fear of swallowing. It's called phagophobia. And this is not to be confused with dysphagia, which is a fear of swallowing pills. Hylophobia is a fear of trees. This fear actually directly translates to a fear of forests or woods and is based on a fear of being attacked in a forest. Trypophobia, that's a fear of holes. To be more specific, this is actually a fear of a cluster of holes forming irregular patterns. It's an oddly specific phobia, but I know someone who suffers from it. Domatophobia, that's a fear of houses. This word means both the fear of houses and the fear of being in houses. Megalophobia, that's a fear of large things. Well, someone with this fear would never be able to go to Kaito Falls. Uranophobia, that's a fear of heaven. To be honest, I'm more afraid of not getting into heaven. Geliophobia, that's a fear of laughter. You can never see a link show. And I bet you didn't know that there's a fear of sitting down. You heard right, a fear of sitting down. It's katisophobia. So what do these persons do? Stand all day. Dextrophobia, that's a fear of having objects to your right. Though this word applies to having anything on your right and even the right side of the body, I can appreciate this, especially when I'm driving and a minibus overtakes on my right and then swerves back to the left and in front of me. See you next time on Bet You Didn't Know. Compliments of Sigismund Consultants, Inc.
You're tuned to 103.1 FM. The time, 7 o'clock in Guyana.
The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and covered by DemeraraWaves.com.
News of this time, I'm Frankie Bob Semple. The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. First, the lead stories. A former employee of Kaito News newspaper has reportedly told his child's mother that he won money he stole from his former workplace. Two men who killed an elderly woman in her home at Robb Street have lost appeals of their convictions at the Caribbean Court of Justice. And regionally, a number of hotel workers in Antigua are still awaiting the payment of severance. And a government official in the British Virgin Islands has been charged for writing a letter to the U.S. government stating that disgraced Premier Andrew Fay was immune from prosecution. The details of these and other stories when we return.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now the news in detail. The Demerara Harbor Bridge between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. this morning allowed vehicles with 10 tons and less to cross. Minister of Public Works Juan Edgel said that was based on advice from structural engineers. He said drivers were also asked to stick to a speed limit of 32 kilometers per hour while traversing the bridge. Light vehicular traffic was allowed from Tuesday night after workers repaired the harbor bridge following last Saturday morning's incident. A fuel tanker, the MV Tradewind Passion, slammed into the bridge as it was approaching the retracted opening to go to Guy Oil with a consignment of fuel. Police said a former employee of Kaito News newspaper, who was arrested in connection with a more than $6 million armed robbery at his former workplace, gave his child mother part of the loot and told her that it was a super bet win. Investigators said they were able to corroborate the story with the woman, Lori Garvey, who subsequently handed over $3.5 million to the police. After intensive questioning, of the suspects, police said former Kaito News research officer Ryan Wharton confessed that he was the mastermind behind the early Monday morning robbery, along with 4 other persons, including 35-year-old Joshua Jr., a security guard at Kaito News. Those arrested so far are 36-year-old Harry Sangster, who is a taxi driver of Hyde Park, Tamari, Mr. Wharton, 23-year-old, Mr. Lemuel Grant, Mr. Collis Haywood, and 25-year-old Ivor Bellamy, also known as Wildlife, who is employed and lives at Back Circle, East Rheinfeldt, and 35-year-old Mr. Junior of Lot 223 Middle Road, La Penitence. Police are yet to arrest the Junior. John Finance Limited, JFL, on Tuesday refused a $20 million refund of payment for 1.4310 acres of privately owned lands in Bedford-Acton that the neighborhood council said in the first place it had no right to sell. The chairman of the BV Triumph Council, Jemuel Baggott, said Tuesday was the first time ever that the John Finance Limited admitted in a letter that accompanied the check that it had transferred its right to Mohammed and Sons and Daughters Trading, Mining and Logging Construction, Inc. According to the letter signed by John Finance Company Secretary Isaac Gonzalez, the company said while John Finance has no intentions of purchasing the property, all of its rights under the contract with the Neighborhood Democratic Council and John Finance have been signed over to Mohammed and Sons and Daughters Trading, Mining and Logging and Construction, Inc. The company says that on that basis, John Finance has returned the check. Mr. Baggott said the letter from the company proved that it was acting in bad faith, having already publicly stated that it no longer wanted to buy the lands as they are privately owned and somewhere that should not be sold. The Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, has dismissed the appeal of 2 brothers against their murder convictions. The regional court also reserved judgment in relation to their appeals against the sentence in the Consolidated Guyanese appeal of Erwin Hines and Cleon Hines versus the Director of Public Prosecutions. The appellants, as well as 2 other men, were charged with the murder of Clementine Fitkow Paris on June 30, 2011, following an arrangement where money was intended to pass from one person to another. At the High Court, the 4 men were convicted of the offense of murder, and they were each sentenced to 81 years in prison. On appeal, the Court of Appeal of Guyana upheld their convictions, but reduced their sentences to 50 years. Being dissatisfied with the Court of Appeal's decision, the brothers appealed to the CCJ. The CCJ, after hearing the appeal, ordered that the appellant's appeal against conviction be dismissed. The court, however, reserved its decision on the appeals against the sentence following concerns expressed by the CCJ judges about the process that resulted in the imposition of the sentence. Full reasons for the CCJ's decision will be delivered in due course. In news regionally, at least 1 woman was killed on Monday when protesters clashed with the police in Haitian cities. Police confronted protesters as anti-government protests turned into looting. Anger is mounting as gang violence has spiraled out of control and disrupted transports of fuel and food. Prime Minister Ariel Henry is asked for foreign aid, but the call has been criticized by some Haitians who see it as foreign interference. In the capital, Port-au-Prince, the protesters erected burning of tire barricades and threw rocks at police, who in turn fired tear gas. Some protesters continued to loot a hotel. Shots were fired and photos taken at the scene by Reuters photographer show a bloodied woman lying dead on the ground. A protester told AFP, Alliance France Press, she was shot by security forces. It is a crime committed by the police, she said. This young girl posed no threat. She was killed, expressing her desire to live in dignity. Police have not yet responded to the incident. There were also protests in the western city of Gonavez, where protesters stormed a courthouse. According to local media, many people in the streets were angry at the Prime Minister's request to deploy foreign forces in Haiti, which they denounce as interference in Haiti's internal affairs. The minimum wage in the Bahamas will increase from $210 per week to $260. The announcement was made by Prime Minister Philip Davis last night. He says for minimum wage earners in the public service, the change will be retroactive to July of this year. The Bahamian Prime Minister also says for minimum wage earners in the private sector, the increase will begin in a little less than 3 months in January of the coming year. He says this will allow employers time to prepare for the increased expense. In Antigua, former Jolly Ranch workers will have to wait a bit longer before they can receive their severance. This is according to Deputy General Secretary of the Antigua-Barbuda Workers Union, Chester Hughes. The Antigua-Barbuda Workers Union is the union bargaining on the workers' behalf. Hughes explained that it's a very intricate process which will take more than just a few days to resolve, despite previous announcements coming from government ministers. Government has calculated that more than $2.6 million in severance would be dished out to more than 500 workers this week. Mr. Hughes explained that once all goes well, the former workers should receive their compensation by next week. He explained that they did not meet the employees last Friday to update them on where they are in the process. In the British Virgin Islands, police have formally charged the rogue public officer who reportedly sent a diplomatic note to the United States court to help free disgraced former Premier Andrew Fay. Najan Christopher was arrested and charged yesterday for breach of trust by a public officer and false assumption of authority. Police say she was granted a bail to the sum of $5,000 to appear before a magistrate's court on November 30. News of the charge comes 5 months after reports of Christopher's alleged actions surfaced within public domain. The diplomatic note in question purports to endorse Fay's notice to the U.S. courts that he is immune from arrest and prosecution. The letter dated May 5, which bears the letterhead of the Office of the Premier and is stamped by the International Affairs Secretariat, not only endorses the Premier's argument for diplomatic immunity, but also requests his immediate and unconditional release from U.S. custody. That immunity argument put forward by his attorney has since been shot down by the U.S. Attorney's Office. We now join the BBC World Service for the BBC International News.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. NATO defence ministers are gathering in Brussels for the start of 2 days of talks where they're expected to discuss providing Ukraine with additional systems to prevent attacks from Russian missiles. Moscow launched multiple strikes across Ukraine on Monday and again on Tuesday. Jessica Parker reports.
After this week's wave of attacks on Ukrainian cities, this two-day meeting of NATO defence ministers will see a focus on air defences. Supply announcements from Germany and the US have been welcomed, but President Zelensky is appealing for more. He's called for an air shield, saying Russian missile strikes will cease to work if his country gets a sufficient number of modern and effective air defence systems. But as countries continue to supply weapons to Ukraine, ministers will be called on to increase their own reduced stockpiles of munitions and equipment.
Russia's Federal State Security Service, the FSB, says it's arrested 8 people in connection with the bombing of the Kerch Bridge on Saturday that links Russia with occupied Crimea. It again blamed Ukraine's intelligence services for the attack. Hugo Bashega has more details from Kyiv.
We had reaction from a spokesperson of for the Ukrainian security service saying that the entire activity of the FSB is nonsense, so they will not comment on the statement that has been released by the FSB in Russia. Obviously, the Russians have accused the Ukrainians of being behind this explosion. Ukrainian officials haven't acknowledged having any involvement in what happened on Saturday, even though they celebrated this explosion.
The French government has begun a process that will force oil refinery staff back to work after they voted to continue a strike over pay. Supplies of fuel have been running short across France. From Paris, Hugh Schofield reports.
This strike, now in its 3rd week, has shut 6 of France's 7 oil refineries. And with long queues of cars now a regular sight at the pumps, it's become a matter of urgency for the government to get the fuel flowing again. Its latest move is to requisition key staff at a refinery in Normandy, threatening prosecution unless they allow some lorry tankers to load up. But the hardline unions behind the stoppages see this as a threat to their right to strike, and they've toughened their position. They want pay rises to take account of the huge profits being made at the moment by the oil companies.
The authorities in India have ordered a pharmaceutical company to stop producing cough syrups after reports that they may be linked to the deaths of dozens of children in the Gambia. The health minister in Haryana state said inspections at a factory run by Maiden Pharmaceuticals found several violations of good practices. The World Health Organization last week said the medicines had unacceptable amounts of chemicals that can cause kidney damage. World news from the BBC. The British economy has come under pressure after the country's central bank confirmed it wouldn't extend an emergency financial support package beyond this Friday. The bank's intervention had aimed to shore up some pension funds, which were at risk of collapse because of the fall in the value of bonds. Official figures revealed the British economy unexpectedly shrunk 0.3% in August. Japan's space agency has had to destroy one of its own rockets in flight after it developed problems following takeoff. It's the country's first failed launch in nearly 20 years. Michael Bristow reports.
The Epsilon 6 rocket blasted off from its launch pad on the southern island of Kyushu. But less than 10 minutes into the flight, Japan's space agency lost the ability to control its direction. The agency said it had no choice but to send out a self-destruct signal. A live broadcast of the flight was halted, and presenters wearing hard hats told viewers there had been a problem. The rocket was carrying commercial satellites into space. The debris is thought to have fallen into the sea, somewhere east of the Philippines.
The court in military-ruled Myanmar has given 2 further prison sentences to the ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi after finding her guilty in separate cases of corruption. She's been convicted of taking bribes from a businessman. Ms. Suu Kyi has already been handed prison sentences of 23 years in a number of corruption cases. Her supporters say all the charges are politically motivated. Health experts in Malawi say the number of cholera cases in the country has more than tripled within the last 2 months as the authorities struggle to contain an outbreak. 117 people have died so far, with over 4,000 cases reported. The outbreak of the disease was first reported in March. BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
To end the news, a look at the lead stories once more. A former employee of Kaito News newspaper has reportedly told his child's mother that he won money he stole from his former workplace. Two men who killed an elderly woman in her home at Robb Street have lost appeals of their conviction at the Caribbean Court of Justice. Regionally, a number of hotel workers in Antigua still awaiting payment of severance, and a government official in the British Virgin Islands has been charged for writing a letter to the U.S. government stating that disgraced Premier Andrew Foy was immune from prosecution. The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com. You can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.
Did you know that a child who is disabled, either mentally or physically, has a right to special care and education, so that that child can develop and lead a full life? Some information from the Rights of the Child Commission.
It's now